Ahoj, tady Jen z Dream Prague. Dneska dělám rozhovor s Bronislavem Sobotkou. Asi ho znáte z jeho kanál na YouTube. Pokud se snažíte učit anglicky, jeho kanál je skvělý zdroj informace. Rozhovor jsme dělali v angličtině, ale existuje český titulky. Mluvili jsme o strach z mluvení a cizím jazykem, o rozdílech mezi Američany a Brity a jak každý den procvičovat angličtinu, i když nežijete v Anglii ani v Americe. Doufám, že se vám bude líbit. Tak, pojďme na to. I'm Jen, and this is Prague, the heart of Europe and my adopted home. Subscribe to get an American's take on this enchanting city and all things Czech. Welcome to the adventure. So, Bronya, thank you for joining me for this interview.
It's my pleasure.
Are you particularly gifted with language? Because these two languages, to me, seem like opposite ends of the spectrum.
It's really funny, but I think I'm particularly not gifted, which is a great gift, because me as a student, I just don't get the explanations. And I really have to simplify it so I get it. And then I just basically tell other people in a way that I needed to understand. So I'm not talented at all, but I think I'm quite good at simplifying it for people on the same level like me. I don't want to say stupid people, but I really need to simplify it for myself and then just basically retell other people.
So that gives me some confidence because I think Americans think that we are just not good with languages. It's just not a skill we have. We can, play basketball, but we can't speak languages, right? But you don't think that's the case?
No, I do believe that anybody who can speak the first language has the ability in the brain to learn the second language. So I think it's a great excuse if you want to say, because if you say, for example, I say, I can't clean, I can't cook. Yeah. And I like saying it because actually I don't want to do it, it's a great excuse. Sorry, my wife. And I think people say, I don't do languages. So it's easy because then you don't have to try. I started with English when I was 20. Yeah. And the best thing for me is there were no stupid teachers telling me that I'm an idiot. Because all my studying at school, somebody told me you're not good, it's terrible, you're not talented, and I believed them. And then I started a new language, and I still hate German.
Yes.
They can't, it's not their mistake, but there's so much you're stupid that, so I can understand a little, but I don't like the language.
I have noticed as a teacher that Czechs are afraid of making mistakes. I think that one good thing about the American school system is that we make mistakes and we're not really embarrassed about it. I'm speaking generally. Do you think that's true about the Czech educational
system? Most definitely. I feel like, sometimes I hear people speaking English and the teacher is doing only one thing, like scanning for mistakes. And then it's like, she works, not she work. And that's so it's not about the message, it's not about communication, it's not what you can, but it's only focusing on what you can't. And I think the idea of the teacher is, I will help them by deleting their mistakes. But what they are doing actually is this, if I don't say anything, there is no mistake. So it's better not to be active, look the other way around. Yes. And I think this is really, really wrong.
Yeah, I agree. For my non-Czech viewers, can you tell me about the shift from teaching Russian in schools to teaching English? What was the history of learning English in Czech schools?
I think there is a lot bad feeling about teachers that they were not able to teach English well, and there is this famous saying that your teacher is 1 unit ahead.
Yes, I've heard that.
And a lot of people blame their teachers for not speaking English well, but I feel it's not really fair because it worked like that until 1989. Everybody had to study English. Russian. Yes. There was no choice. So there were a lot of Russian teachers and they were teaching Russian language. Yeah. And then there was the Velvet Revolution, 1989. We were free and nobody wanted to study Russian again. Yeah. And the same teacher, they came to you and say, okay, so Jan, you have a choice. You will teach English from tomorrow or you will leave the school.
Wow.
And so they had to start teaching English, but nobody trained them. It was like, okay, do it. So obviously the teachers were not very qualified, but and it took some time to get them ready or prepare new teachers. So I think this shift, it took a few years before the teachers were actually ready to do it, but I don't blame them. It's somebody come to me and say, okay, you teach Portuguese tomorrow.
Right, very difficult. How do you give advice to Czechs who they have to live here for work? How do they practice their English every day? What advice do you give?
I generally say the first thing you can do is talk to yourself in your head in English. I think in English, I pray in English. When I think about a day in the evening, I do it in English to just kind of practice creating ideas. It's very easy.
Yeah.
And you can speak English with your friends.
Yeah.
I made my friends talk to me in English in the pub.
Oh, it's
I
good.
say I wouldn't come if they don't do it. They hated me, but they switched for some time.
Yeah.
And also you can find a native speaker. It's very easy nowadays to find somebody online and practice.
You speak very quickly for a Czech person speaking English. I can tell you have a very high level understanding and comfortability with English. It's great.
Yes, because I think I know there are mistakes, but I don't care so much about it. There is something I really want to say, like the message, and that's what I'm interested in. I just feel there is one thing typical for Czech people, that they want to wait until their English is excellent and they want to start using it.
That's how I feel about Czech. Give me advice, because I'm really shy about it. I can speak to a camera in Czech, but I'm very nervous about my mistakes. What do you tell them?
Just do it step by step. You know, you have to go outside of your zone of comfort.
Yeah.
And I know you're doing that. And if you do it a little every day, it will be better and better. When I started working in a shop in Scotland, they made me to come to customers and say, hello, can I help you with anything? And they answered, and I often didn't understand, so I didn't want to do it because I hate bothering people. I don't like when people do it to me in the shop.
Yeah.
I just want to look, and I hate when people come.
Yeah.
And I started doing it. At first I was sweaty, nervous. And then I realized that after a month, I was actually looking forward to customers coming and my conversation with them. So it took a month of daily pushing the boundaries.
Yes.
Then I discovered it's a pleasure for me. So I think it's just step by step.
Okay, I love it. I love the attitude you have. It's great. I have some Slovak friends, and I didn't quite understand that the language is so different, or not so different, but there are some differences. And I unfortunately, I hear that Czechs are less likely to understand Slovak, the younger ones, whereas the Slovaks understand Czech. So in Brno, do you think there's more understanding of Slovak language because you're closer?
I'm not actually sure. It's maybe because we've got quite a lot of students studying here, and they often stay, so maybe we hear it more often.
Okay.
Because, you know, I got quite a few friends that are Slovak that came here and stayed. But, you know, my students, they don't watch Slovak TV, they don't read Slovak books, they don't listen to their music. So we are close, geographically, but I don't think they actually are interested and it's set into Slovak culture or anything.
Do you notice a difference between Americans and British people?
I would say I do, and I think it's generally in the approach to life, or what is okay or not. I mean, I really feel that Americans are direct in some way. You know, for me it's scary when people start talking to me and I don't know why. You know, you wait in a line on the bus and somebody says I don't know, something like, I'm going to visit my grandfather, and and they tell me, and I think that must be an American because nobody. And I'm like, I don't care. And so that's the thing that kind of felt that British people were more going around, as you said before, kind of. And also I think everything wasn't so great. You know, I feel like in America everything is fantastic, great, and amazing, and I felt like in Britain is still above the Czech level. But
Sure. Yes, I mean, clearly things are not great in America lately. There's a lot of problems, but it's part of being polite. And I would say people in the South are really, really polite. People maybe in New York, they're more like Praguers. They're just get out of my way. I've got somewhere to go. So it depends on where you are.
Yeah, that's true. But also, for example, when I was in the US just for a short time, when I had a map on the street, people just stopped and asked me where I'm going, and I was so positively surprised because you can walk, I'm afraid, with a map in Brno for hours, and people would be like, yeah, she's walking with a map. She likes it.
Right.
And so
that's her problem.
So people were really helpful and immediately, and I think the same experience in Great Britain was when I tried to look lost, people helped me. But it wasn't so much like it's a natural way to stop and talk to me because maybe I need something. So that was really nice for me. And I kind of feel that it's generalization. Americans don't have the feel for the history. Because sometimes people say, this is very old, it's from 1890. And I was like, that's not old.
Right.
It's almost a modern architecture in the Czech. Right? So I felt that, you know, that the conception of what is old is completely different. And then the distance is also different.
So the last thing I want to talk about is your YouTube channel. Do you enjoy it? It's somewhat isolating to be behind a camera. You're not, even though thousands of people are watching you, it's just you and the camera. What do you feel?
You know, if let's say you're a rock star and 50,000 people come to your concert, it's a big thing. It's a full stadium. But when 50,000 people watch a video, I don't see any of them. I just talk, you know, I'm alone in my kitchen. I have to clear the stuff away and then I talk to the camera. So it doesn't feel like the people are there. So I'm still shocked when somebody says, I know you. And I'm thinking, which party, or, you know, was it a student 10 years ago? It's still, I think it's difficult to connect it with real life for me. So it's...
Is it gratifying? Do you get satisfaction from this work? Because I know it's a lot of work to make what you do, to do the videos. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, I do. And I think the main thing is that you create something once and then people can watch it for years and they say, oh, it helped me during the test, or finally I understand. Oh, thanks, I was in, you know, Britain and it helped me. So I really feel
that's nice.
The commenting part, when people say something that it helped them, that somebody watched it, it's really important.
You know, I don't think I've ever commented on a video until I became someone on YouTube. I just never thought about it, but they matter.
I'm the same. Now I'm trying to say, hey, this is amazing because
like,
I know how it feels.
Yeah, exactly. Your channel, I feel like it's so great because there are these bite-sized lessons that students can take with them. How do these videos work as a tool? What do you want the student ideally to do with a 10-minute video that they've watched on your channel? What then do they do with that?
Honestly, the main thing I want them to do is to get excited about English. Because honestly, I can't teach anybody in 10 minutes almost anything. Or there is like, okay, this is a word and you're using it wrong, but it doesn't actually change the English as such. I think what I want to show is like English can be fun. It doesn't have to be boring. You can study on your own. There are a lot of resources. And I often want to say like things like how to study or this is a good book, but people are not so much interested in that. So it's much easier to get people's attention when I say, I got 5 words and you're saying them all wrong. And people say no, and they click, they watch. And,
interesting.
And then later I can maybe talk about the things that I really feel are more important. It's like how to think about mistakes, how to study, how to change your mindset, how to remember vocabulary. But if I call the video how to change your mindset about studying English,
no, it's not interesting. I don't want my mind changed. Usually you explain in Czech and then you will have the English part, whereas there are many YouTube channels that explain English but from a British or an American teacher, and it's all in English. So what is the benefit of doing it like you do?
Maybe the main thing is that if you're a beginner, you want to start with English, and you just click on the video and there is an American lady explaining it in English and you can't speak English, it's almost impossible to get it. And I think it can be overwhelming, and maybe you can just stop because you feel I'm stupid, I don't get it. So I generally feel my videos are great for beginners because I say it in Czech I think in an easy way because I need it myself when I started. So I think the benefit that I say, this is this is that. And the second thing is that I can speak about typical Czech mistakes. Because let's say a great teacher from, I don't know, Edinburgh, they don't know what we do wrong, like things we confuse, typical mistakes with pronunciation, for example, W and V, we don't have distinguished sounds for them, we just say V. And a lot of people don't realize that there are 2 sounds, and probably if you teach English in, let's say, Edinburgh or London, you maybe don't know that the Czech language has this typical problem. So I think ideally it's for lower levels. People want to delete or destroy their Chinglish. And I feel it's absolutely okay if after some years of watching me, or months, they move on to native speakers. At a certain level, I think it's beneficial.
Absolutely, because when I came to teach, we go through. My background is in history and politics, not in pedagogy. Yeah. So it's not in teaching language, and so we go through this course to learn how to teach. But it's not so extensive, like I'm sure you had. And so you unleash these American young people into a school in Prague, let's say, and we are trying to explain to Czechs how to speak English in English. And I like the style, but it took me many years to understand, oh, this is why. If only I knew this is why they made the mistake, I could have addressed it at the beginning. So I think your channel is unique and a great resource for that. And schools should be recommending your videos along with their native English speakers. I think it's great.
Thank you. I'm getting ready.
Oh, it's good. No, I think it's a great resource.
Thank you.
So, thank you, Bronia, for joining me for this interview, and I'm really pleased to meet you again after our short interaction at the Polyglot Conference. So thank you again.
Thank you.
And please go, and I'm sure you're familiar with his website, or with his YouTube channel, but if you are not, I will leave the link below, and you will get some excellent tips on how to learn English from someone who has spent years doing it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Uvidíme se příští týden. Ahoj.
Bye bye.